Good morning, Fearless fam! Today's video is all about answering a question that I've gotten a shocking number of times, which is China safe? If you've come to this video looking for a very short answer, I will give that to you and satisfy those needs right now, and that answer is yes, China is safe. Now, if you're here for the long answer, I've got more details for you. If you are headed to China soon and you have a lot of questions like I did before I went to China, be sure to check out the links that I've put in the description below. I have a perfect packing list for you down there. I have information all about VPN, and I have a China travel video guide. I'm constantly adding new videos about China, answering people's questions that I get a lot on social media, so be sure you're subscribed so you can catch all of that new content that's coming out. If you're new here, I upload videos every single week between Monday and Thursday. And I am the captain of the beautiful group on the internet of anxious but fearless wanderers, and we're called the Fearless Fam, so welcome. All right, let's get into the details. Okay, so first thing I need to say is that my experience is limited in China. Obviously, I haven't been everywhere in China. I spent a lot of time in Beijing and Nanjing. I spent a couple days in Shanghai, and I spent a couple days in Anhui province, Quanjiao County? I don't know, somewhere around there. Basically, I went to what was considered a small Chinese town because there were less than 1 million people living there, and then we went outside that town to 2 other like actual villages and a rural island on a lake area that had like 2 families living on it. So anyways, that's my experience in China. I've never been out to Western China. I hear that it's not as unsafe as a lot of Chinese people make it out to be. A lot of Chinese people are actually afraid of Western China. It's just because there's some ideologies and religious beliefs out in the western parts of China that don't really fall into line with the Communist Party. So there's some political tension in the west of China, but from what I've heard, it's not unsafe. I pretty much felt safe everywhere in China. I took cabs by myself. I took train rides with my husband. I rode on the back of a motorcycle. I biked all around Beijing. I walked a lot. I lived in China for 10 months and I got catcalled 1 time. In America, I get catcalled not all the time, but if I were to count how many times I get catcalled in 10 months, it's definitely more than 1. That's especially crazy to me because I was in huge cities. Beijing and Shanghai have about 20 million people and Nanjing has about 10 million. So it's definitely like the kind of place where you would normally get catcalled if this was in the US. This is like New York City kind of a thing. And nope. No, just 1 time. I did not feel threatened. I was mad because it was a sexist move on his part and that made me angry, but I did not feel unsafe. Honestly, I was like, I could probably take this guy. The main reason that China felt so safe to me is because it's a very communal atmosphere when you're there. And I'm not saying that everybody in China acts like family or people just have conversations with each other all the time or like everyone says hi to each other. It's just that the interactions that you have with strangers in China are not quite the same as they are in America. I think in America we tend to be in our own little bubbles and we're like, individuality is very highly regarded in America, whereas in China the group mindset and communal mindset is much more highly valued. So interactions with strangers tend to be more casual and normal. Like in America, sometimes you can get really formal with a stranger, even if it's not a formal situation. Or if you're driving, for example, and the car in front of you cuts you off, a lot of times your reaction in America is to get like super mad and flip them off and tell them how you feel. In China, it's definitely not like that. It's more acceptance. It's like, well, this happens all the time, and it just happened to be me that it happened to this time. The thing is, I'm speaking in very general, broad statements, so I'm not saying this about all Chinese places or all Chinese people. I'm just telling you what my impression was while I was there, and from what I came to understand, aggression was fairly rare in China. People were not very aggressive to each other very often. I rarely saw people getting like road ragey. I was the ragiest one on the road. More often than not, I actually felt really, really welcomed by people. I was never around anyone in China where I had like a bad vibe, like, ooh, I should get away. Except for foreigners, of course. There was a guy that I met who was super creepy and asked me if I would get into his cab with him. He was just like, oh, do you want to get a drink? And I was like, no, because it's like noon. He was like, oh no, let's get a drink. I was like, no. I said no last time. Oh, okay, get in my cab and we'll go get a drink. No, I gotta go get groceries, goodbye. And then I crossed the street literally just went into the middle of the street in between all the cars to get away from him, and I knew that was safer because Chinese people are a little more alert when it comes to driving and people like randomly walking in the middle of the street, so it was all good. But yeah, that's my rant. My point is, I never felt threatened by a single Chinese person when I was in China. Also, a big reason that I felt super safe in China, and something that really bothers me about America, is the availability of guns. Chinese people aren't allowed to have guns just casually. From my travels around the world, what I've noticed is that people associate America with guns, which is so crazy to me because I have never even touched a real gun before. I'm actually like a massive pacifist, which means that I am not into guns at all. I really hate guns. They freak me the f out, and I get really nervous when I see guns. So the fact that guns are illegal in China and that I knew that no one was like carrying one on them unless it was some freak situation, that made me feel very comfortable. And actually when I came back to the US, I had a few moments where I was like, oh my God, people could just be carrying guns right now. They could be having a gun. They could have a gun. They could have a gun. And it freaked me out a lot. So yay, no guns in China. Another reason I felt super safe in China is because there's a crap load of security and police in China. Police presence in China is very strong. I'm pretty sure if you make a call to the police, they're gonna be there within like, I think it's like something like 4 minutes or something. I can't remember exactly, but in Nanjing this was true. Basically there's little tiny police stations. Like it's not like a big office thing. It's like a little police like meeting point basically. So they're stationed at like certain distance from each other all around the city. So there's police everywhere. They do carry guns and they're very large, terrifying guns. So they kind of scare the shit out of me, but you know, it's the way it is. There's lots of security to get on and off public transportation, in and out of the airport, any big transportation hubs or big tourist sites. There's always like a stop point where you have to like put your bags through one of those x-ray scanning machine things, and you have to walk through a metal detector and sometimes like get pat down and all this kind of stuff. And I remember I took a flight out of Beijing and I went through security 3 times before I got on the plane. So that makes me feel really safe because there's a lot of like points where they would, if someone were illegally carrying a gun or a weapon or clearly carrying around something that was meant to be harmful to a lot of people, it would get caught pretty quick. The biking and driving aspects of China can be a little dangerous. Driving in China is a lot more fast-paced and lawless. Like they drive in between lanes, so like hang out in between lanes. There's a lot of like driving there that's a little terrifying. While I never felt unsafe with a cab driver, I definitely have felt unsafe in the car with someone driving me somewhere. Car accidents and accidents that involve the death of a pedestrian or the death of a biker are actually uncomfortably common in China. Be super careful when you walk around, bike around, or get in a car with someone. Anything like that. Obviously, you're gonna have to do it. I did it for 10 months. I'm here, I'm fine. Just be aware that there's a lot of like gray areas when it comes to road rules in China. It's so crazy how in America, if someone came up to me when I was working at Nordstrom, for example, and they only spoke Chinese, it's not expected that I'm gonna go find someone who speaks Chinese and help them or be like overly helpful towards them or anything like that. Like the expectation is that you're gonna come into a store and speak English, which now that I've had this experience in China and I'm able to kind of take a step back and look at that, is scary for foreigners. If English isn't your first language, that must be kind of scary because when I went to China, there was no expectation that I was going to speak Chinese. They looked at me, they saw Waiguaran, which means foreigner. But the thing is in a lot of conversations with people and like conversations, they would speak Chinese to me and I would just kind of like smile and nod and speak like a little bit of English and broken Chinese words back to them. And people would work really hard to get their point across, even if it wasn't that important. So my point is, despite the fact that there's this huge language barrier, I found people to be so welcoming. Oh my God. I remember our landlord inviting me to go out on her moped with her, like right on the back of her moped, and she was gonna take me to Fuzimiao, which is like this big tourist site in Nanjing, and she was gonna show me around. And the only reason I knew that's what she was doing is because she was speaking at me and Eric was in a different room, but he didn't have time, so he didn't tell her that he was there. And he heard her saying all this stuff, and I was just like nodding and agreeing, and she She spoke at me. She knew I didn't understand, but she kept speaking at me and kept inviting me and welcoming me. And Eric later told me, he was like, she's inviting you like to go out. And I was just so moved because, like, if I'm being honest with myself, I would never do that for someone here. If someone doesn't speak English, I would feel super awkward and uncomfortable and I wouldn't want to hang out with them. I mean, I'm just being honest. It's just not expected that you're gonna go out of your way for someone who doesn't speak English in America. So I was moved and my mind had to be shifted to understand why someone would go out of their way for me when I don't even speak their language. One thing I want to address about safety concerns in China is staring. If a Chinese person is staring at you and you're a tourist in China, it's not because they're mean mugging you. They're not like, dirty American. They're curious. They're curious about you. China is, I think it's something like 92% Han Chinese, which is a particular ethnicity of China. So if someone was from an ethnic minority in China, as a foreigner looking at them, I probably wouldn't even know, but any other Han Chinese person might be staring at them too. Unlike in America where I look around and, you know, I have a Mexican neighbor down there, I've got an Indian neighbor down there, I've got a Filipino friend over there. In China, it's like I've got my Chinese family, my Chinese friends, my Chinese coworkers, and everyone I see around me is Chinese. Like, for the most part, everyone you see in China is Chinese. So it's really fascinating for you to, as a foreigner, to step in and be surrounded by Chinese people, but you don't look like them. It's just really interesting to people there. So it's just curiosity. It's not mean mugging, I promise you. One thing you really need to be aware of is that petty crime is rampant in China. So, you know, big crimes are not very common, but petty crime is an everyday occurrence in China. Petty crime would be someone taking your purse or stealing your bike. Just being aware of that is really important. Lock your door when you leave your hotel room or your apartment. Don't wear your crossbody purse behind you. Move it in front of you. If you're gonna go on a subway and you're wearing a backpack, the subway's really crowded. Personally, even if the subway's not crowded, I would always move my backpack in front of me. Just little steps like this to prevent the opportunity for petty crime is what's gonna save you from things getting stolen off of you. Obviously, the thing you're gonna wanna guard the closest to yourself is your passport. Your passport is very valuable in China. So do your best to not lose it or make it available to somebody. That's the reason that petty crime could become unsafe for you. I think the chance of you getting like mugged or kidnapped in China is pretty damn low, but the chance of someone taking your wallet or your passport out of your purse if it's open and just hanging out there behind you and you're on the subway together, that's a lot higher. So you're just gonna wanna do a lot of things to prevent this from happening. Also, if you're curious about how to lock a bike to prevent it from getting stolen, I've got a link up above on how to bike in China. I also have a video called 20 Travel Hacks for China where I give a little bit more advice on how to prevent petty crime. But overall, to answer the question, is China safe? For me, as a woman, as an American, and as a foreigner in China, I never felt threatened. I actually felt more safe in China than I did when I came back to America. I don't even know how that's possible because when I first got back from China, I was in like the smallest town I've ever lived in, which is the town I grew up in, and I felt less safe in that town than I did in Beijing, which has 20 million people in it. So that just goes to show, overall, I felt incredibly safe when I was in China. So I hope this video has put you at ease if you were worried about this topic. And don't forget to check out the links down below. I have a packing list. I have information about VPN. I have travel hacks for China. I have a video comparing Beijing versus Shanghai, my top 5 favorite foods in China, all kinds of stuff. So check out those links down below. Go watch some more videos and be sure to subscribe before you leave today. And I will see you, I think when you're watching this video, I'm gonna be in Arizona. I think I'll see you on Monday. Okay, that was a terrible ending. Goodbye.